4 types of classes of medication. They have different actions in the body. Do your own research online and look into the parathyroid enhancer class of medications. Hi, welcome to the Judy Terrell Show, where I explore topics intended to optimize every body 50, 60, 70, and above. Hello, everybody, and welcome to your Second 50. Thank you for joining me today. And if you are joining me today, you are in my podcast series of 6 episodes, and this is episode number 4. And the theme of this series is basically what I'm saying, what is a guidebook for women post-menopause, all right? There's all sorts of issues that go on during perimenopause that need to be addressed, and I am actually doing a series on that as well. But then, every woman's going to get to the point where she's now post-menopause, and the issues that are going on with perimenopause have come to an end. Things have stabilized in a different state, and now you need a new operating system for some of the changes that have gone on and that are going to stay that way. The changes that have occurred are going to stay this way for the rest of our lives. We're not going to go through another period of menopause or similar hormonal changes. So what do you need to know to deal with the changed states post-menopause that can help you to minimize what are the symptoms or the new states of being of post-menopause and make it as comfortable and optimal living in our new bodies as possible for the many, many more years, if not decades, that we are going to remain on the planet. All right. So that is the purpose of this series. And we are now on episode number 4. And on each episode, I'm addressing a specific new state and what it is and what are the problems, and then what do we need to do to make it more optimal and to maybe learn some new things so that we know how to manage the new states. Okay. So what I'm going to talk about in this episode is bone health. And basically that involves, there's, optimal bone health, and then there's osteopenia, which is like bone health going slightly down. And then there's osteoporosis, which is, significant bone loss enough to be labeled as, a disease. Okay. When we have natural estrogen occurring in our bodies, estrogen is a facilitator of bringing the components from our bodies that we ingest through nutrition and through the environment into the bones. And then the bones, estrogen recruits those elements and then carries them into the bones, where they are then used to, keep the bone process. Osteoblasts make new bone, osteoclasts remove old dead bone, leaving room, therefore, for new bone to be created, and hence this kind of cyclical balance of bone production and bone breakdown. All right. Estrogen facilitated carrying raw products that are necessary for bones into the bones. So when we no longer have estrogen, it's like the transport for those elements is now missing. All right. And therefore, we have to change some things that we're doing because before that, estrogen kept things, transported and the bones would remain healthy. But when the estrogen's gone, we have to make sure we're getting enough, if not maybe more, of the elements that need to be brought into the bone. And we have to do something different with the loading of the bone so that in the lack of estrogen, other like influences are making these other, bringing in the elements that need to build bone. All right. So what are the elements that we take in that need to be available to build bone? We know these, okay? Calcium, vitamin D, and then the hormone estrogen. But the estrogen doesn't go into the bone and, create the bone. It carried these elements into the bones, okay? So we need to have calcium and vitamin D specifically in order for bones to be able to have the raw product they need for the osteoblast to make the bone, okay? In addition, now that we're in postmenopause, we have to be loading the bones in such a way that, the force of loading them sends messages to the body to bring that the calcium and the vitamin D into the bone. Whereas when we were younger, you didn't have to have as much of the loading because estrogen, that was part of its job, is to bring it into the bones. Okay. So now without the estrogen, we have to now not only have the raw products of which bone is made and make sure we're getting enough of that, and maybe even a little bit more than when we were younger. We also then have to have a loading factor so that those elements are now recruited into the bone because estrogen isn't there to carry it there. Okay. So you have to have the demand for it at a higher level than when we were younger women. All right. And now, that is basically the situation when estrogen is gone. What do we need to do now so that we are not seeing bone density go down every year after menopause? All right. Because if we're going to be alive on the planet into our 80s and 90s, which is new, 100 years ago, that wasn't the case. If you're going to die by 60 or 65, you didn't really have to worry about, 5 years, 10 years, and having bone density go down. But you do have to worry about that now because we're living way longer and we're not going to be on the planet for another 3-4 decades. So that bone integrity is really important if we want to, not be compromised from the inside. Our whole bone system is the scaffolding of our body. If that's breaking down, we become an amoeba. Tongue in cheek. All right. So number one, in postmenopause, it is very important that you are getting enough calcium and vitamin D. Vitamin D3 being like a particular type of vitamin D that's linked higher, to better bone health. So how do you get calcium? Obviously, you can take calcium supplements. I am all about behavioral medicine in that what can we take in that's like a natural food source that can get the calcium up. You may decide you want to take calcium supplements. Your doctor may prescribe that for you. The thing about the calcium supplements is beware if you're taking in 500 or 1,000 milligrams at once, the body can't process that all at once. So you'd be well advised to score those pills so that you're taking more of a dose that would appear in the food. Your body is better able to like IV drip it into the system because too much at once, it's the right amount, but the wrong administration. And so women are finding higher calcium scores for heart disease because they've been taking calcium supplements, and not even that they overtook the calcium supplements. It was the manner in which the amounts at one time. So if you take a calcium supplement, score that calcium supplement so that you're getting the 1,200 or 1,500 milligrams a day, but you're titrating it through your body, like taking it 4 times a day instead of just once. All right. Now, supplements aside, how can you get calcium from what you're actually eating? So the foods that are highest in calcium are dairy. All right. So you've got your cottage cheese, milk, like like animal milks, to a lesser degree, yogurt, Greek yogurt. All those have calcium in them. And they would be a good source, so, but I have a lot of clients that are either dairy sensitive or they're avoiding dairy because of agribusiness and they don't like the manner in which the dairy farmers, or the dairy is produced with hormones added. And then there are women who are staying away from the dairy because of the hormones that are treated for the cows to have that milk. So dairy is a category that's very high in calcium, but if you don't want to take in dairy, then you have some other options. So the next best source would be fish with bones, okay? So sardines and like canned salmon where the bones are attached, they're in it. And they're not huge bones, they're little bones. And if you mix up like, canned salmon with avocado mayonnaise or crushed avocado or hummus, you then have like something similar to like a tuna fish salad, but it's salmon salad with the bones in it. You can do the same thing with sardines, or you can put sardines into a salad as a protein source, but you're getting the bones there. So the fish with bones, very good source of calcium. Another really good source of calcium from a food intake perspective is leafy greens. So, your kale, Swiss chard, turnip greens, mustard greens, arugula, endless number of mixing them up would be a good way to get it. High in calcium, relatively speaking, and a really good source. And additionally, chickpeas in particular in the legume family are higher in calcium as well. So there's your food sources, and they're not, I mean, relatively speaking, that's a limited amount of foods that are high in calcium, hence why some women, even during their they still have their estrogen, will have osteoporosis because they're not getting enough calcium. So, but in postmenopause, we definitely want to make sure we're getting that calcium, because we need to have that to be able to recruit into the bones. Without the substrate, you can be doing all the other things right, but not have the right raw product. And now the last way you can get the calcium is many like non-dairy milks now, cashew milk, almond milk, are calcium fortified. I know 1 cup of cashew milk or almond milk unsweetened has 50% of the calcium that you need for a day. So, adding that into recipes that you're cooking with, possibly drinking it as a beverage, using that for a morning cereal, possibly. Lots of ways to use those fortified non-dairy milks. And then another high calcium fortified food is orange juice. Not that I'm big on telling people to drink juices of any sort, but they are enriched with calcium. And if you you can put like 2 ounces of orange juice and then dilute it with some seltzer or some water, and a couple times a day, be getting that in without the sugar hit from the juice itself. So I am so excited to announce your second 50.life. I have been working in the fitness industry with individuals, both men and women, over 50 years old for 42 years, and really specialized in the last 10 on over 50. I'm over 50 myself by a long shot. And I've helped literally thousands of men and women both to lose the extra body fat that they gain in the second half of their life. 2, feel better in their own bodies energetically. I have helped people to reverse and eliminate health problems, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, pre-diabetes, symptoms of menopause, to name just a few. On this platform, you will have access to an entire body of resources, exercise videos, mini courses, eating plans that are specially designed for over 50 men and women, because there's special needs for our demographic. And in addition to the virtual resources that you'll have access to if you join at any time that you'd like, you also have access to me for one-on-one coaching through a group coach call every month. So you can bring your specifics and we can address those as you're also getting information that is specific to the over 50 population. 50s, 60s, 70s, and now 80s is the demographic that I'm working with. So it's your second 50.life, YOURSECOND 50.life. Go check it out. It might be the single best thing that you've looked at like in your second 50s. Getting calcium, there are some food sources. We now have to make sure we're getting 1,200 to 1,500 milligrams of calcium a day in order for our bones to be healthy post-menopause. All right. Secondly, vitamin D, D3. The number one way to get that, there isn't a lot of vitamin D foods that are high in vitamin D. Our bodies produce it when we're in the sun. And so, there's the issue of being out in the sun and then, skin cancers. So you've got, we're all putting on sunblock to avoid the skin cancers over 50. And yet at the same time, that's blocking the vitamin D from being produced in our own bodies because the sun is now blocked. So, I say to people, go out in the sun. Don't go out between the hours of like 11 and 1 and bake, try to get into the daylight hours that are less, intense and still getting the sunlight. Try to have as much skin exposed as possible. So it's not just arms or just like you got a half sleeve, have a tank top like this, shorts or a skirt or a skirt of some sort where legs are shown. As much of your body exposed to the sun as possible to bring in that vitamin D3. And then if you're in an area of the world where you don't have a lot of access, you're working during the day hours when the sun is out, over-the-counter vitamin D supplements might be an option for you. So you can keep that in the back of your head if you are somebody who's not able to get enough daylight and be exposed to it. And it doesn't take long. You don't have to be, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 10 minutes at a time, kind of spacing that out through the less intense daylight periods of the day is enough to get you the vitamin D that we're looking for, because we need the vitamin D and we need the calcium to recruit into the bones in order to make the bone. Okay, so there's the substrates. All right, now let's talk about the loading. When we were younger women, just, because estrogen was around recruiting those elements into the bones, it wasn't as important for us to actually be loading bones and sending messages to bring those things, from other, chemical pathways than estrogen. But now that we don't have the estrogen, it's almost like we need to use these other methods or other vehicles to get the calcium and vitamin D into the bones, but they're not going to be called into the bone unless we are actually loading them. Okay. So this is where you're all reading about this. It's all over social media influencers and, Google searches, and your doctor, variety of specialists will be telling you, you have to do, and I'm going to clarify something, not just weight bearing exercise like walking. You have to do like weight loaded exercises in order for there to be more load on the bones in your everyday life and your own body weight, because that's going to send the messages to bring that calcium and vitamin D into the bones. So you have to be loading them. And you can load them in a variety of ways. You can use dumbbells, you can use kettlebells, you can use elastic bands and tubes. You can use position of your body and gravity, and like leaning or like taking a position where gravity in your own body are actually exponentially multiplied because of the position you're in. So for instance, using a TRX suspension system, you're only using your own body and gravity, but if you take more of a lean, then there's more resistance on the bone, on the muscles, which are now connected to the bones. And that's the whole thing. You're loading the muscles attached to bones and pull on them. So you've got to be loading muscles, and that also then loads the bones because they're pulling on the bones. So when something pulls on the bone sends other chemical messages. Hey, bring in the calcium, bring in the vitamin D. I need the osteoblasts, need the raw product to build this bone. Okay. So you don't have to have the estrogen for that to occur, but you really have to have enough of the substrate, and you have to have the right loading, in order for that process to be replaced in your postmenopausal years with what estrogen was kind of facilitating in your younger years. Okay. Now, as we're older, the loading, you can get hurt if you do it too quickly and not progressively. So, if you have not been doing any, resistance workouts, don't start by going into the gym and having a, trainer show you what to do and then like load right away. You want to progress. Like you want to be on a progressive loading schedule, starting with lighter weights and then doing that for 4 weeks and then adding a little bit more weight. And then repetitions, reps and weight load together will make the loading factor. All right. So you can be doing, you have to have a certain amount of weight. But if you can't lift heavier weight because your joints are at risk, then you can do a moderate to heavy weight, like underneath the heaviest that you can do, but then increase the reps. But it can't be lightweight. It can't be weight that's less than, what you're moving around in everyday life. Otherwise, you're not going to get that bone recruitment that we're after. All right. So in a nutshell, that is like the postmenopausal, kind of combination. You need to have the substrate and then you need to have the loading. Now, there are a lot of women who are postmenopause, they get their DEXA scan, and they're not only osteopenia, they are now osteoporosis, and sometimes like in the severe level. When you are in that level, you can't do the strength training because the bones are already so broken down that you can break them, by just doing the loading. So there is where medications are going to come in. All right. I'm not an expert. I can speak to them, but I'm going to give you some information that you then go to your doctors, your specialists, your gynecologists and your primaries and possibly endocrinologists. There is a couple classes of drugs for osteoporosis. Bisphosphonates are one. SERMs, or selective estrogen receptor modulators, are a second class. A third class are what are called monoclonal antibody treatments. And then a fourth class are actually hormones, sometimes estrogen, but the medications that are out, the main hormone in the hormone category of these medications is parathyroid medications. So you have several different classes of drugs. the bisphosphonates and the bisphosphonates are working on blocking bone loss, okay? But if you block bone loss, then you are also blocking bone production, because if the old bone isn't being pulled out, there's no space for the new bone to go. So there's some issues with those drugs, but they are the number one line of defense that the medical world is kind of promoting right now. But if you're young enough, like 50s and 60s, and you're going to be on those you need to be on those medications for the rest of your life, being on them for too long is problematic. There are women who were taking them, when they were in their 50s, who are now in their 70s and 80s, and there's some problems with that. So now when they dose these, they will have you do them for 2 to 5 years and then take a break and then maybe come back or maybe do a different class of drugs. But I want to make you aware of that there's some long-term issues with the use of those drugs. And so that's one class of drug. The second class is the hormones. And this is the one I'm going to ask, if you're in your 50s and 60s, this might be the class of drugs that you want to ask your doctors about. These are Forteo and Tymlos. These are the names of the drugs, and they are going to recruit they make parathyroid hormone increase, and parathyroid, like estrogen, helps to recruit those building blocks of elements into the bones. And so you want to ask about the parathyroid hormone therapies for osteoporosis, so that you can get the best idea of the choices available to you, so you can make the most informed decision. All right. All right. So that's where I want to go with this podcast. We want to get the substrates in so that they can be recruited by loading the bones. And if your bones are already over osteopenia and into osteoporosis, then you are probably, if you're in your 50s, 60s, looking at needing to take some of the pharmacology. I just educated you into there's 4 types of classes of medication. They have different actions in the body. Do your own research online and look into the parathyroid enhancer class of medications. And that is my message for today. Okay. I hope that you got some pearls. If you did, please hit like, please hit subscribe. Follow along the next 2 episodes in this podcast series. Go back and look at the other 4 and join me on my platform, yoursecond50.life, where I have this information. This podcast is available on there, as well as many, many, many other resources with topics all related to both men and women over 50 and some of the issues that we have to know how to manage differently than when we were younger, because we're in a new body as we move forward in life. All right, everybody. I hope to see you soon on another podcast, another resource of mine. In the meantime, be well, live your optimal life, make the second 50 even better than your first 50. Pleasure to be with you, everybody. And if you would like to have access to some of my additional resources, I can be found at Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and on my website, www.judyterrell.com.